All right, guys, welcome back to episode 8 or 9. Not entirely sure yet, but I think it's 9 of Strategic Angling. My name is Brady. I'm joined by JJ and Chuck. We have got an exciting topic today about finesse jigs. Ice is thawing around here. Things, bass are going to start eating, and they're not eating, the big, fast-moving stuff just yet as they transition from winter to spring. So we wanted to talk about finesse jigs. So I'm going to let JJ or Chuck kick us off with an overview, and then we're going to talk about some we like and some trailers and go from there. So what did you got?
You want to have at it? Either way.
I can do it, yeah. So finesse jig, some different interpretations of what that may mean. If you're down in Lake of the Ozarks, for example, it would mean like a little ball head jig or a little brown jig, what they call it down there in the Ozark land. A lot of times it's a round ball head with a small trailer. They'll pitch it and skip it around under docks. It's a small profile bait. Looks like a crawdad most of the time. Up here, the other thing, usually a light wire hook and a light weed guard. Up here we do more what I would call finesse flipping, where you're going to talk about maybe like a Strike King, Bitsy flip, the War Eagle heavy finesse, which has a little bit heavier hook, a little bit heavier weed guard. But a finesse jig is a good bait. It gets bit. It's good for, especially if you're around spotted bass or smallmouth bass. It's just a smaller profile than your typical flipping jig. A lot of times out deeper, colder water, cleaner water. It's just a more natural presentation from a lot of the jigs that we normally throw.
Yeah, and then definitely in colder water when the bite's really tough. I really like the Strike King Bitsy flip. You can kind of compare it. There's a regular jig. There's a Bitsy flip, so you can see it as quite a bit.
And those are the same weight, right?
Yeah, same weight jig. Both of them 1/2 ounce. Significantly smaller, but it gets a lot of bites, especially when the bite is tough. Like I said, colder water, I'll put a little small salty chunk zoom on there. That bait's really good. If I do throw rocks, I like the Buckeye balling out jig, Gerald Swindle's jig, I believe. That jig is really well too.
And that's a football head on that one?
No, it's a ball jig, just like the War Eagle. I think those jigs do really well on the rocks. They don't get hung up very easy. I like the Bitsy flip Strike King one because it's got a little beefier hook in the wood. So it seems to come through there without snagging up.
So long story short, finesse jig, less skirt, smaller hook, smaller head, just a smaller profile.
Yeah.
Do you change obviously you're not using these on your gigantic flipping sticks. Are you changing equipment when you size down on these finesse jigs? Are you going to fluoro or are you going to lighter braid? What are you doing there?
I do. I throw almost all the time. I throw these on fluoro. 18-pound sunline is what I try to get away with. I try to get away with the heaviest line I can. Mm-hmm. But sometimes if you get too light, sometimes I'll have to go down to maybe 16, 14.
Yeah.
But I try to throw 18 if I can.
And 18's probably on the higher side.
Yeah, and you could use braid too. You could use 30-pound braid,
yeah.
If you want to. I just feel like when it's cold like that, and I'm trying to maximize as many bites as I can, so I try to throw fluorocarbon. And a lot of times when the water is really cold, sometimes it's really clear, especially up here. So I want something that I have a little confident that I'm going to get bit.
Same sentiment, JJ, or you do a little bit different?
I go even lighter. A lot of times if I'm throwing a finesse, like a balling out jig, or Bravarni makes a little one called the Little Something, or a War Eagle finesse, I throw 12 to 14 pound. I use these a lot at Lake McBride, which is, there's spotted bass. It's only a lake in Iowa that has spotted bass, but it's rocky, it's clear, and there's spots. And I, typically I'm throwing 12 to 14 because I want the bait to fall and get to the bottom. And I just think with a lighter line, I'm also not dealing with super big fish. I've been to Table Rock and Lake of the Ozarks and thrown similar jigs, the Aikens jig or the ball and out jig, kind of that type style of jig with a little crawdad on the back. And I think it's a finessier presentation, and it needs lighter tackle. Now
a lot of times they're using spinning gear, even, especially at Table Rock Lake or lakes that are just crystal clear, where you're seeing 10 to 25 feet down. A lot of them are throwing it on 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon with a spinning rod.
Okay, so that covers equipment a little bit. How are you fishing these jigs? I know Chuck mentioned he's primarily flipping. Anything special you're doing with these differently than?
I don't fish them much different than I do a regular jig.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, to me, it's just a different tool. It's a little smaller profile, when the fishing's tough. But I virtually, around here, obviously if I was at Table Rock Lake or a really crystal clear lake, I'd be fishing them different. But around here, I virtually fish them the same as I do the heavy jig. I'm just trying to get away with a smaller bait to hopefully entice a bite.
And I'll say on that front, Chuck's coming from a river perspective a little bit there.
Right.
Like he said, if you're banking it and you're fishing ponds or Lost Grove or small bodies of water, one thing I find useful is just to cast it and let it sink till it hits the bottom.
Right.
Make sure it gets to the bottom. I feel like a lot of newer people with finesse jigs don't let it get all the way to the bottom because they're not used to how slow that thing's sinking.
That's the most important of any jig. It's got to hit the bottom. People that
except for swim jigs.
Except for swim jigs. If you're throwing a flipping jig or pitching jig, the key is it's got to get to the bottom.
Yeah,
you got to get to the bottom. So
for me, at a Lost Grove or a small local lake or something, less is more with these jigs. You don't need big, huge, erratic movements to work them. You can really just slow drag them if you wanted to, but you're trying to imitate just a tasty, dead little, no effort snack to these bass.
Little
JJ,
crawfish.
you agree with that? Anything you want to add on that front?
Yeah, I think one thing to watch for when you do use these is and a lot of the Ozark guys will tell you kind of want it to try to fall horizontally, whereas when you're flipping and you flip into a lay down and you want it to go straight down. These, a lot of times, the guys will use like the little critter craw from Zoom or something and a lot of these have hidden weights. The weight will come down the shaft a little bit, and what that does is lets it fall more horizontally instead of directly fall. But I think if you ever caught a crawdad when you're a kid or threw a crawdad in a lake or something, when they kind of fall flat and their claws are up and they're just kind of going down. And that's, I think, what you're trying to mimic with this is maybe a crawdad that was up on a dock and then it's fallen down to the bottom or whatever.
Especially in clear water.
Yeah, and I think I fish them around docks a lot, and I do cast it a little more than I do pitch or flip, usually because it's cleaner water. If I'm throwing one of these, it's usually cleaner water. The exception would be, if I'm downsizing from a normal flipping jig, and something like the Bitsy flip or the Ike's mini flip or whatever, they come through grass pretty well. And if you're flipping edges of grass and stuff, it's just like normal flipping.
The great thing about these jigs is, like regular flipping jigs, you only need a few colors. I throw black and blue, green pumpkin, or brown.
Yeah.
And brown's probably the most famous, called the LBJ, Little Brown Jig. Bradley Holman, won a lot of money on that jig, especially fishing Grand Lake and the Ozarks.
And yeah, these are great, winter transition type jigs. But in addition to that, they're also can be good for very, very pressured fisheries.
Sure.
There's stretches
or smaller, fisheries where the fish are smaller, even
smaller fish.
Where you're only trying to catch a 12 to 14
if you're
inch
going
fish
down a bank that has been flipped 3-4 times before you, and you go through there with the same exact presentation they've seen 4 or 5 times that day, nobody here is going to feel real sorry for you. You didn't get bit there. Mm-hmm. You got to try something different. And sometimes that's going bigger with your presentation, and then a lot of times it's going smaller. So.
Yeah, and don't be deceived. You can catch just as big a fish with a finesse jig.
Yeah.
as you can a regular jig. You know, just because it's finesse, that doesn't mean you're not going to catch a 5-pounder on it. I mean,
Yep.
you can catch many 5-pounders on these smaller jigs.
And one thing to be aware of, just like we talked about last week in swim jigs, is you need to be aware of the hook you're using. You know, they don't warrant the same hook set if you're using
Right.
a lighter wire.
Yeah,
Hook.
you got to match the rod line to the jig.
Yep.
Yep. You guys want to talk trailers for these real quick before we sign off?
Yeah, I think obviously you're downsizing, so you're going to a smaller trailer. The small Kamikaze Craw has a nice action to it. It fits well on a jig. You can get the Pocket Chunk Junior, Ultra Vibe Speed Craw.
And if you don't want the flap, you could try something like the Smalley Beaver from
Yeah,
Reaction.
that or
Reaction
I use a
Edition.
chunk. I almost use a chunk 100% of the time. That's just
And you said that was a Zoom.
Zoom. You know, they have the big salty chunk and then they have the small salty chunk. And I use the small in this version. Not a lot of action, pretty subtle,
Yeah, Smalley
especially in
Beaver.
cold water.
Junior D-Bomb is a good finesse jig trailer.
A lot of guys they'll take that Smalley Beaver and they won't open up the appendages.
Yeah.
They'll keep them
Then it-
closed up, so it's not much action. So I think a lot of times when you are fishing this jig, you don't want a lot of action.
Right.
You know, it's very subtle application.
And again, it doesn't. A lot of times, if you're using a 5/16 or a quarter ounce, it's not going to have enough weight to trigger the kicking action. So you kind of want more of that gliding down or
Right.
subtle non.
And the biggest key to any of these finesse jigs is you got to be patient. This is not a running down the bank 100-mile-an-hour fishing technique. This is something that's really slow, sometimes painfully slow, especially for me. I'm not the slowest fisherman in the world. I like to move, but
And one thing
when
I
you're
wanna-
fishing these, you got to slow down.
Oh yeah. One thing I want to add, you know, most of these little flipper mini, you know, finesse jigs are typically coming in lighter weights, but if it's a real windy day you can make a lot of jigs into a finesse style jig by thinning down your skirts, doing what you can to size down your presentation, you know, with any old jig you have in your box. These ones are just, you know, specifically made for that, but there's a lot of times, you know, if I think it's tough, I'll trim down a football jig way down. You know, but still keep a good head size on it so it gets to the bottom. But you know, you don't want to be out here flipping a quarter ounce flipping jig in 8 feet of water with 20-degree wind. You're not probably going to feel pretty much anything. So
You
just
better be
aware of that.
downwind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You'll find out you have a fish when the fish wants you to know.
yeah,
That situation.
yeah.
So.
It's a tough situation there.
Yeah, a lot of guys will crop the top. You can. I don't know if you can see that Bavarni, but it kind of has the War Eagle has the same deal. That the top section of the skirt, instead of folding back over, has been cut, so it's kind of right around the head, just flaring out around the head.
And you can do that with any of your, like
Yeah.
Brady was saying about his jigs. You can actually drop the skirts down, and you can actually trim the top half of that, so that will thin out your skirt.
Yep. and then-
Kind of do the same thing if you don't want to buy a designated finesse jig. So that works too.
All right. Well, this is a shorter episode for us. There's really not, a huge thing to cover on these. Is there anything you two want to add before I talk about our giveaway?
Well, hopefully we're never throwing them. You know,
They have their place, though.
You know,
like
they
you
do have
mentioned.
their place, and you have to have it as a tool. But
Yep.
I like to throw big jigs, but sometimes you do have to scale down.
I think when you want a more natural presentation, but like you alluded to earlier, it's a finesse, but it's still a jig. It's not a drop shot. It's got a little more bulk. It's going to attract a bigger bite. It's a bigger piece of meat for the fish. So I think it's still a jig, and I think it's a way to catch big fish in clean water, and you just have to go a little stealthier because of the clean water.
Okay. Well, very helpful. And again, we don't have a specific sale this week for the finesse jigs, but what we do have is another giveaway. Matt from K&K has put together a little Price pack, it comes with a Spro 3700 size waterproof box. And then what jigs we're going into it, Jay?
Yeah.
The Bits, this one?
Yeah, Betsy.
We got the Bitsy Flip, the
War
War
Eagle
Eagle,
Finesse.
Heavy Finesse, the Ike's Mini Flip, and then the
Ballin' Out.
Ballin' Out jig from Buckeye. So
And I took you through these
And then
trailers and also
2 bags of trailers. So again, a nice little starter pack of finesse stuff. So get on our emailing list, get subscribed to the channel. We appreciate everybody's done that so far. And if you've already done that, great, you're entered. The only other thing to add about this giveaway is if you're not local, shipping cost is on you. So good luck. Please join our mailing list. May have a fun interview after this clip. Not entirely sure yet. Trying to get some tour guys to come on and talk, which I think will be pretty cool. But if we don't have one, we'll see you next Friday at 10 a.m.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yep, thanks.
See you later.